The new Fulford book tells the story of the first of three battles of 1066 and explains how the two invasions, one from Norway and the other from Normandy, were organised. This story could only be told because of a 20-year-long investigation. So here we explore the archaeological research that identified the site. Battles require big archaeology. You cannot assume the location, so a wide area has to be searched. The project area was based on all of the previously published speculations by historians. This extensive search, undertaken as a community project, established what is normal and what is exceptional in the landscape, and these norms proved important later when studying the density of iron finds, which pointed to the battle action. Geology and LiDAR proved invaluable in understanding the landscape of a millennium ago. Slopes, bogs, rivers and floods are tactically important, so worth studying in any battlefield project. Germany Beck was the obstacle that the invaders had to cross and which the northerners had to defend. To understand the way the battle was described in contemporary sources, it is vital to know what the landscape looked like on the day of the battle. This area floods and several meters of material have been deposited on the surface since the time of the battle. The auger was a valuable tool to allow the 1066 landscape to be defined. For this project, the literature was treated like any other archaeological data. The actions and landscape descriptions could actually sometimes be tested. Fortunately, there is an extensive literature about Fulford surviving. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, for example, makes more mentions of this battle than either the Stamford Bridge or Hastings battle, but gives us very few details of the action. The Norse literature tells us much more about the battle. It also became clear that the skalds or poets reported what they actually could see, and this made its way into the histories. They were not reporting what they were told by others, so the reports are actually subtly different. This was both challenging, but was an opportunity to pinpoint their location. It is necessary to apply a very harsh test of near perfect fit between the literature described when testing for the landscape. The descriptions seemed inconsistent until it was recognized that the local landscape changed as the tide flooded this landscape. The battle date coincided with a few days each year when the tidal bore could carry both longships upstream without rowing, as one source reported, but also floods Fulford. Testing the descriptions of the landscape and the action against all of the sites suggested for the battle, only one location actually passed. Field walking was undertaken when areas were being metal detected. However, much of the land proved to be rich in pottery fragments, so only a limited area was sampled for two primary reasons. First, the extensive area would have burdened the project with the responsibility of assessing and conserving what was collected. The second issue was that much of the ceramics had been translocated by flood or human activity, so they could not really be used for dating contexts, even when excavating. However, the collection of significant quantities of hearth debris plus smithing hearth slag in one area and a range of 13th to 15th century household items elsewhere allowed the use profile of these key areas to be determined. Based on the experience of other sites from this area, no finished metal objects that could be related to battle were actually expected. The density of finds was therefore a parameter that was assessed when collecting the metal, with some ferrous densities proving to be hundreds or even thousands of times higher than the background. It is worth noting that this work was undertaken before GPS was available, which could have perhaps provided a better, more precise data set. The point should also be made that finding battlefields will often rely on surface finds, so it was the location of assemblages such as the arrowheads, sword fragments or hearth debris which was the significant find. Collections rather than individual finds proved important. Analysis of the surface assemblage told us one clear story. A large field, known as 40 acre, revealed a number of zones where slag hearth bottoms, ceramic hearth debris, tools and iron billets were concentrated. There is no local record of this being a settled area or an area ever being noted for metal production. Indeed, the whole area had been prone to flooding, which has served to prevent items being found and collected after the defeat of the invaders, which came at Stamford Bridge just 5 days after Fulford. The full significance of this post-battle recycling zone was only fully understood once the course of the battle itself had been interpreted. As noted, battle sites are very big, so the value of excavation is not immediately obvious. Only once a confident site for the battle could be determined, based upon the literature, the landscape and other studies in this holistic investigation, could excavation be justified. However, after 13 years, a single test pit produced fragments that could indeed be related to conflict. Over 7 years, each excavation then extended the information revealed from the previous digs. The methodology for this project sought to identify the line of the ancient roads leading to a ford as one priority. This was important as armies can only move with speed along proper roads. Since the title of the battle also mentioned ford, it was logical that roads should link to any ford. 10 possible fords were identified along Germany Beck early in the project, but none were connected by roads. However, during our first dig, one archaeologist noted an embankment, and over 3 excavations, a 10-metre wide stone crossing suggestive of the Roman era was identified. This was very important, since it strongly supported the battle location that other investigations had suggested. There are also some interesting footnotes to this ford road. Below the paved surface, a flat stone supported on some vertical stones was found, and a short distance upstream of this stone ford there were a series of stepping stones crossing the beck. There were also cartwheels, ruts cut into the surface of this road. This crossing has evidently been of very ancient origin and remained in use perhaps to as late as the 17th century. It was noted earlier that the evidence suggests that the field of battle was cleared and the metal recycled. However, the water and mud at the stones in the base seem to have prevented a few items being discovered. The points of several swords were actually recovered beside this ford. These finds are enigmatic because the current assessment is that these were intentionally broken. All of the blades suggest that they had fullers and the stranded iron that is typical of wrought iron of this era. These fragments suggest that the blades were impressively thin and certainly capable of cutting off a limb with a single stroke. During a complete sort of the ferrous collection in 2017, many ultra-thin tanged arrowheads were identified. Most were too thin to allow for conservation, and very sadly, the photographic record was lost. However, 7 arrowheads left enough iron to be drawn, and a digitally enhanced X-ray image allowed one more to be accurately recorded. The shape is typical of the tanged arrows employed by both sides at Fulford. But just as important is that all these finds came from a tight zone, and that zone is consistent with the emerging interpretation of the battle. Their location therefore helped confirm several aspects of the battle action itself. The life of the archaeologist is easier when finds can be compared with items that have already been found, identified and catalogued. The items here took some years to interpret, but they are now understood to be anvils. Because they had to be driven into a block of wood in order to be used, it is likely that they were abandoned in the recycling area upstream. When news of the defeat at Stamford Bridge arrived and the Smiths had to run back to Rickle, they probably abandoned these items. The floods would have floated these blocks of wood downstream, where the anvils acted as anchors to ground them at one of a number of sharp bends in the beck. Most of the items were found inverted, and half still have remnants of the wood block into which they were driven. It is also not impossible that similar anvils were deployed on the battlefield, as they were well suited for beating dents out of helmets and shield bosses. The stage methodology that was devised for this project, although it took 10 years to have a confident location and another 10 to confirm it by excavating physical evidence, the approach worked to localize a small battlefield in a very large landscape. 3 disciplines were important to the success of the Fulford project. The first was routinely reappraising the evidence in a formal process of iteration. The second was the discipline that every hypothesis had to be tested. The final point was that no loose ends or exceptions were acceptable, and this prompted many valuable lines of research. This image below summarizes the 24-hour battle sequence. One parting thought is that in the book we look at the way history is recorded and events reported. It was noted earlier how the written records upon which historians rely were tested here at Fulford whenever it was possible. So it is disappointing to report that modern historians have woefully neglected this first and possibly largest battle of 1066, which has such an impact on the subsequent battles. It is even more strange that historians have invented a name for this battle that has never existed in any written record. Ancient sources and the archaeology tells us that this battle was fought at Fulford. It should not be called Gate Fulford or Fulford Gate. The book Finding Fulford reported much of the work to locate the battlefield, but that was before the excavations. The new book looks at the people, the politics and the planning behind the events, as well as describing the battle action in great detail. It includes an annex discussing the archaeology and another looking at the local geology, which was very important. There is another article describing what we know about army organisation and weapons, as Fulford sheds some light on this topic. Anyway, this is the last of the sequence of 4 short presentations about Fulford. I do hope you've enjoyed them.